For most of the Ukraine war, the one big advantage Russia has had over Ukraine is its missiles. Sure, Ukraine has missiles. Beyond its own, such as the Neptune missiles it builds domestically, Ukraine has limited amounts of Storm Shadow and ATACMS long-range missiles, along with other missiles provided by its Western partners. But Russia has always had more, a lot more. That's all about to change as a new US weapon is about to turn the Russian front into a kill zone. And if one big change in US policy takes place, that will end up being the least of Russia's worries. On August 24th, the United 24 media reported that US President Donald Trump had officially approved the sale of 3,350 brand new extended-range attack munitions, or ERAM, guided air-launched weapons to Ukraine in a deal believed to be worth approximately $850 million. Note the use of the word sold here. This isn't the US donating these new missiles to Ukraine. Instead, it's building the weapons and Ukraine is buying them, suggesting that this new flow of powerful guided bombs can continue for as long as Ukraine has the money to afford them. United 24 notes that this $850 million package also includes several other weapons platforms, including new air defense systems and guided multiple-launch rocket systems. However, it doesn't specify which of these two types of technologies Ukraine will be receiving. Still, what this tells us is that the ERAM is a surprisingly inexpensive weapon. Even if the entire $850 million was dedicated to the 3,350 ERAMs alone, that would work out at a per-missile cost of about $253,000. According to Defense Blog, Ukraine's long-range drones cost anywhere between $110,000 and $300,000, meaning this new weapon is already right around the price that Ukraine would expect to spend on a drone capable of striking Russian targets in both occupied territory and inside Russia itself. But given that the $850 million package involves other weapon systems, we can presume that the per-unit cost for ERAMs is significantly lower than $250,000. A separate United 24 report suggests that the US developed the ERAM to serve as a direct rival to the CAB guided bombs that Russia has been using to devastate Ukraine's cities for several years. That's an interesting prospect. Russia's glide bombs are essentially massive dumb bombs converted into semi-precise munitions through the use of an inexpensive wing kit. Each glide kit costs Russia between $20,000 and $30,000 per unit, the BBC reported back in May 2024. United 24 says that the ERAM was designed to both be more precise than Russia's glide bombs while being manufactured at a significantly lower cost. Those three words might add an extra wrinkle to the purchase information we just shared. If the US has managed to hit the $20,000 to $30,000 mark for its ERAMs, that means the majority of Ukraine's $850 million purchase has gone toward other, unnamed weapons that we know are part of the deal. Frankly, it's hard to say. Neither Ukraine nor the US has said what those weapons are, so it's tough to make any sort of estimate. Two things we do know for sure are that the ERAM is a weapon that Russia has never seen before, and it's going to be in Ukraine sooner rather than later. In its August 24th report about the deal, Defense Express says that the first batch of these new guided bombs is going to land in Ukraine sometime within the next 6 weeks. That means an arrival date of early October, which we're willing to bet will be a period when we suddenly start hearing about a lot more Ukrainian strikes against Russia's railway networks and other military targets, but more on that later. Defense Express adds that Ukraine could have been receiving these weapons sooner, were it not for the delays that have prevented Ukraine from making its purchase. The outlet suggests that the US was waiting to see if its efforts to set up some sort of trilateral talks involving itself, Russia, and Ukraine would come to fruition, which would be a sign that the Ukraine war was taking steps toward a ceasefire or peace agreement. Those talks haven't happened, so it looks like the US has said enough is enough and finally decided to start providing Ukraine with weapons it should have had a long time ago. Better late than never, Ukraine will likely feel. But whatever lingering resentment the country had over the delay will probably evaporate once it has the ERAM in its hands, and the reason why is simple. The ERAM is a devastatingly terrifying weapon. It's also not quite as new as it appears. Information on ERAM first appeared in mid-2024, with the program reportedly tailored to Ukraine's needs, United 24 says. The initial development contract required production to begin within 24 months, but the upcoming delivery suggests the manufacturer accelerated the schedule. There are a couple of interesting nuggets of information here. The first is that the ERAM probably would never have existed if Putin hadn't launched his Ukraine invasion. This is a weapon designed specifically to provide Ukraine with the same, or even better, glide bomb capabilities as Russia, and the only reason it's needed in the first place is because of the existence of glide bombs. Putin hoisted himself by his own petard here, and he's soon going to regret whoever it was in his military administration who came up with the glide bombs putting the idea for ERAMs in the collective US head. Then there's the accelerated delivery schedule to consider. That almost makes up for the delay enforced on Ukraine by America's attempts to push through trilateral peace talks. If things had gone according to the initial plan, ERAMs likely wouldn't have been available until 2026. However, somebody made the decision to ramp up the pace. Perhaps that was always the idea. Accelerating ERAM production might have bought time for attempts at negotiation. Once those attempts failed, the missile will be ready to use immediately, rather than serving as a threat that Ukraine could pose against Russia in the future. That's speculation. But what isn't speculative is the ERAM's capabilities. United 24 says that the weapon is much more sophisticated than Russia's glide bombs, instead being something of a Frankenstein's monster hybrid between a dumb bomb and a cruise missile. It has a massive range of between 150 and 250 miles, making it ideal for striking targets in Russia's rear as well as in Russia itself. In fact, the only weapons Ukraine has that compare to the ERAM in terms of pure range, United 24 says, are the Storm Shadow and domestically produced drone missiles we mentioned earlier. Beyond its impressive range, the ERAM can reach speeds of over 475 miles per hour. It's here where the cruise missile crossover comes into play, as a dumb bomb dropped with a standard wing kit isn't going to reach those kinds of speeds. So it's likely there is some kind of propulsion system built into ERAMs that gives them a burst of speed strong enough to make it possible for them to avoid air defense systems. All of this would make the ERAMs a great weapon, though it's not too far outside the realm of the capabilities of Ukraine's long-range drones so far. What really separates the ERAM from what Ukraine already has is that it combines this range and speed with amazing precision and enough power to cause some serious damage when it lands. A single ERAM weighs around 500 pounds. We don't know how much of that weight is explosive versus the apparatus for the ERAM, but we can probably safely assume that an ERAM packs a pretty strong warhead. Even more terrifying for Russia is that the ERAM is accurate within 33 feet. That's a big difference from Russia's glide bombs, for which precision gives way to power. Russia's tactic of attacking Ukraine's cities makes for big targets, meaning it doesn't matter if a glide bomb lands hundreds of feet away from what Russia intended to hit. It'll still cause damage that makes Putin happy. Ukraine, not willing to go down the Russian route of committing war crimes against civilians, prefers a version of the glide bomb that can hit its intended target. The ERAM provides this with its impressive accuracy. And that's the word we keep coming back to, impressive. Another standout feature of the ERAM, United 24 says, is that it's been designed to be as simple as possible. That matters because Ukraine's Air Force operates a mixture of Soviet-era jets, such as the MiG-29, and some older Western platforms, including the F-16. ERAMs can be fired from every existing aircraft Ukraine has, and due to their simplicity, will likely be usable by any aerial platform Ukraine happens to receive beyond those it's already operating. There's even more. Back in January, United 24 wrote a detailed review of the ERAM's intended features. We've already shared most of the key information, but this review also mentioned that the US was considering making the new weapon compatible with its Quicksink technology. The idea here was to make the ERAM capable of reaching its target without the use of GPS, which is susceptible to Russian electronic warfare techniques such as jamming. Quicksink is a brilliant addition to the ERAM. It combines radar and infrared technology to give whatever weapon it's attached to dual-mode navigation capabilities. Essentially, the ERAM gets a backup plan if Russia happens to disrupt its guidance systems. The US has already successfully tested the tech in its Joint Direct Attack munitions, discovering that Quicksink combines resilience to electronic warfare measures and exceptional precision. Oh, and it's also a ship killer. As the name implies, Quicksink is an excellent choice for maritime operations due to its ability to identify, classify, and target ships, United 24 reports. The system's targeting capabilities are so enhanced that it allows the attached weapon to plunge below the waterline to hit ships where they are most vulnerable. Ships sink quick with Quicksink. How useful this particular aspect of the system will be to Ukraine right now isn't really clear. Russia's once dreaded Black Sea fleet has practically become a non-factor in the Ukraine war, thanks to Ukraine destroying a third of the fleet with missiles and drones. Russia withdrew its ships in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov to Novorossiysk, The Guardian reported in July 2024. A year later, the Kyiv Independent reported that Russia had also pulled many of its ships away from the Crimean ports in which they were previously stationed. So scared was it of Ukraine's immense ability to take out Russian naval vessels. So Quicksink likely won't be used for the purpose that gives the system its name. However, it's not a bad system to have in case Russia ever gets brave enough to send ships into the Black Sea again. And even if it doesn't, Quiksink's electronic warfare resistance makes it a valuable addition to Ukraine's arsenal. If Ukraine gets it, that is. Right now, we don't know if the ERAMs heading into Ukraine come with Quicksink. United 24 notes that the ERAM can be equipped with the system without mentioning whether any are making their way into Ukraine. Perhaps it's a needs-must situation. Ukraine could buy Quicksinks if it requires them, but it may be holding off until it discovers how effective ERAMs can be on their own. As impressive, there's the word again, as all of this is, there are still some questions surrounding the ERAM. Remember that this is a weapon that was designed specifically for Ukraine, meaning it hasn't been tested in real combat yet. Defense Express also says that it isn't clear just how strong the base ERAM's defenses are against Russia's electronic warfare. It points to the example of the ground-launched small-diameter bomb, which it says struggled mightily in the face of Russia's electronic warfare to the point where the US had to delay shipments of the weapon to Ukraine until it could be tweaked. Hopefully, lessons were learned from that incident, but we won't know for sure until the first ERAMs arrive in Ukraine and get fired at Russian targets. There is another question that needs to be answered, by the way, but we'll get to that in a moment. Assuming all of these questions are answered in Ukraine's favor, the country will be happy to hear that journalists believe that the US will be producing ERAMs at a rate of about 1,000 per year. It's unknown at this point if the US has already made the first 1,000. Presumably, it can't be too far off, given the delay in sending the weapons, which provided time for a stockpile to be built up. However, if we assume that the first 1,000 ERAMs will arrive in Ukraine by the end of 2025, the rest will take another 2 years to land. Unless the US has already built the 3,350 ERAMs that Ukraine just bought. In that case, Russia will have to be very afraid, which brings us to why this new US weapon is going to be so valuable to Ukraine. We mentioned earlier that ERAMs give Ukraine the ability to strike the Russian rear. That means Ukraine will be able to fire them from behind its front, with their range allowing them to travel enough of a distance that they'll touch down behind Russia's front. That's ideal for hitting Ukrainian territory that Russia occupies, and as United 24 points out, Ukraine has a specific type of target in mind, that ERAMs seem to be purpose-built to strike railways. Or in a broader sense, rail infrastructure. Russia's military runs on rails, with almost everything its soldiers needs on the front line being transferred to them via Russia and Ukraine's huge railway systems. That reliance on rail creates targets, or as United 24 puts it, in recent months the Ukrainian armed forces have intensified strikes on railways, the Russian military's primary transport lifeline. A large supply of missiles could paralyze this channel for moving cargo and weapons to the front. The outlet isn't lying about Ukraine's recent focus on Russia's rail-based logistics. In the last month or so alone, Ukraine has conducted at least 4 strikes against Russia's rail assets. July 29th saw it land the third in a trio of daily strikes against a Russian railway line in the Russian city of Salsk, which is in the Rostov region that lies just beyond Ukraine's eastern border with Russia. About a week later, the Kyiv Independent reported on yet more strikes in the same region, this time targeting a railway hub as part of a 2-night series of attacks. August 19th brought with it the news that Ukraine's forces had destroyed a Russian fuel train carrying vital supplies to occupied Zaporizhia, and just 4 days after that, United 24 reported that Ukraine had struck the Petrov-Val railway hub in the Russian oblast of Volgograd. Strike after strike after strike shows us that Ukraine has figured out a new strategy. It can't do much about the sheer number of soldiers that Russia is able to send to fight Putin's war. However, it can ensure those soldiers don't receive the fuel, equipment, supplies, food, and even reinforcements they need to conduct strong assaults against Ukraine's defenses. Take out the rails, and you may just take out Russia. ERAMs, with their range and devastating power, are the ideal weapon for attacking Russia's rail hubs inside Ukraine. You'll notice that we were very specific with our language there. We said inside Ukraine, rather than simply saying Russia's rail hubs. Do you remember that question we said needed to be answered earlier in the video? That question is all about whether or not Ukraine is going to be able to use the ERAM to its full potential. And right now, it's looking like that isn't going to be the case. On August 23rd, the Wall Street Journal, or WSJ, reported that the US has implemented a block on Ukraine's ability to fire long-range missiles into Russia. That block was kept quiet, with the WSJ saying there is now an approval process in place from which Ukraine has to get permission from the Defense Department to fire missiles at Russia. 2 unnamed officials told the Journal that there was at least one occasion when Ukraine asked to fire ATACMS missiles into Russian territory only to be rejected thanks to this new approval process. Ultimately, the WSJ says it's US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth who holds final say over whether Ukraine can launch US-made missiles into Russia. It appears this process is in place as part of America's efforts to create peace between Ukraine and Russia. Some might even argue that it's a deliberate plan to weaken Ukraine's attacking threat, either to placate Putin into becoming more willing to negotiate or to pressure Ukraine into agreeing to making some of the concessions that Russia demands. Either way, this blockade will also affect ERAMs. As the WSJ says, several US officials said the use of ERAMs, with a range of between 150 and 280 miles, would require Ukraine to seek approval from the Pentagon. The State Department did not respond to a request for comment. Ukraine will be saddened to hear that, especially as its long-range drone strikes inside Russia are already having an amazing effect. Take Ukraine's targeting of oil refineries as an example. On August 19th, United 24 reported that Ukraine's drone strikes have taken out about 13% of Russia's oil refining in August alone. And there seems to be no sign that these strikes are going to slow down anytime soon. Ukraine's attacks on Russian refining have caused fuel prices to soar, and according to Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service, have even led to Russia imposing a strict 10-liter or 2.64-gallon fuel limit in the Kuril Islands region. In an ideal world, Ukraine will be able to follow up on this success by using ERAMs to take some of Russia's refineries offline for good. Its drones, as impressive as they may be, simply don't pack the same explosive power as the ERAM. If the US lifts its approval process on strikes within Russia, every refinery that's in a border region could find itself the victim of swarms of ERAMs that obliterate them, rather than causing isolated fires as Ukraine's drones typically do now. Unfortunately for Ukraine, it won't be able to use ERAMs to their full potential until the US changes its policy. But even if that change never comes, the ERAM is still a potential game changer for Ukraine. Having the ability to hit rail hubs as hard as these guided munitions allow could mean that Ukraine cuts off vital supply arteries in contested territory. ERAMs will also be ideal if Ukraine wants to hit command posts, ammunition storage units, and similar facilities upon which Russia's troops on the front rely. Ukraine has a great equalizer in this new US weapon, one that allows it to match Russia's glide bomb onslaught in terms of pure power, while giving it more range and accuracy than Russia could ever hope for. And if the US ever lifts its ban, Russia will find out just how devastating the ERAM can be in the hands of a country that knows precisely what it needs to hit to weaken Putin's war machine. But perhaps Putin has just been foolish enough to give the US a reason to lift its ban and allow Ukraine to make full use of the ERAMs it's about to receive. Americans are outraged as Russia just hit a US factory inside Ukraine with missiles. Discover how Russia just crossed a serious line in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of the latest weapons Ukraine receives to fight against the Russian invasion. And thank you for watching.